But there were some other teachings of Ajahn Chah which were also extremely relevant, even though they seemed to be quite mundane, but they were very, very important. One of them, which was, to me, was one of the most shocking ones for me, anyway, when I heard it. It was where some of us were walking with him somewhere, and I don't know, it was almost as if he could read my mind, because he just turned to me and said, I can't give you any wisdom, All I can give you is patience. And I just was thunderstruck. What? But I came here. I came all the way around, halfway around the world, to a Buddhist country. I came to your monastery, where the great wise master was, to get your wisdom. He says, I can't give you any wisdom. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So my previous talks were about some of the teachings I learned from Ajahn Chah in Thailand. And it's sort of just fortuitous because yesterday was Ajahn Chah's birthday. He'd be 104 years old if he was still alive. So in Thailand, it's quite at our monasteries in Thailand, it's quite a significant event. It's still a very important ceremony to honor the teachers. Actually, our teachers, many of them we can say they're kind of priceless because, if they're good teachers, they guide us in the right way to live our life, guide us towards wisdom, and ideally be free of too many troubles anyway. And Ajahn Chah was quite an exceptional teacher because even though he was a Thai, he, for some reason, he attracted quite a few Westerners there to his monastery in northeast Thailand, very remote part of Thailand. Part of it was, the way he set things up, and part of it was there was already a Western monk who'd been there for many years who could translate. And many of us who went to Thailand couldn't speak Thai, of course, so we relied upon a translator. And some of the monasteries, they did have some kind of translator, but many of them weren't very skilled in English language, especially English to do with meditation or with how the mind works. They could just give you the very, very basic instructions. So after a while, there were quite a few Westerners came to Ajahn Chah's monastery, so much so that he allowed the establishing of an international monastery nearby. And the abbot was this American who'd been there a long time in Thailand with him. So it was a monastery where the teachings were given in English rather than Thai. When Ajahn Sumedho, the abbot there, first came to stay with Ajahn Chah, the teachings were in Laotian language, dialect. And even though Ajahn Smith had learned a little bit of Thai from being in Bangkok, but he didn't know the Laotian dialect, so he sat there for many hours, hours and hours and hours, listening to words coming out of Ajahn Chah's mouth and couldn't understand anything. So that says a lot for his endurance, that he stuck with it. But partly it was also the way Ajahn Chah set things up. The whole way of life was a teacher in a way. The early morning meditations and evening meditations, the work schedule and everything was sort of also supportive of his verbal teachings. So anyway, very, very basically, there is two ways to realize peace of mind, or two kinds of peace of mind in Buddhist meditation. The first one is very temporary, but not too difficult to realize, at least to some degree. The second one is more long-lasting, maybe even permanent, possibly, but requires a lot more effort. In our Buddhist language, the first one is called samatha, or develops. This is by developing the factor of collectedness, or in Pali samadhi, focusing on meditation object, spending quite a bit of effort focusing on one meditation object, like breathing, for example. And if one can do that to a certain degree, depends on, can't say when exactly, but depends on one's effort, one could realize some tranquility of mind, peace of mind. The trouble is, it's very dependent upon how much effort we put into the focusing. And you can say on one level, just focusing your attention, what could be easier? Just focusing on your breathing. What's so complicated? Well, we all know the complication of the mind. It's easy to say, focus on your breathing, but usually your thoughts get in the way, your emotions get in the way, your bodily sensations get in the way, and distract you from that simple object of watching the breathing. But if one perseveres with that, at least that principle anyway, probably most people can have some experience of some degree of calmness of mind. Whether it takes, days or weeks or months, who can say really, and basically the more effort we put into that exercise, just like physical exercise, the more exercise you do, the stronger you get. So if you do this exercise, and it requires some clear understanding of the process, because it's not just a matter of just forcing this to happen. Some people, they have a lot of willpower, so they can sit there and they can huff and they can puff and they can, but they just get a headache and they get a backache, and so sometimes you have to know when to kind of step back, and then ideally how to deal with these various disturbances of mind. You can kind of push them aside temporarily, but sometimes you make them worse. If you suppress your anger, for example, you get more complications, you get more psychosomatic ailments or something or other. But the second kind of Buddhist meditation is called Vipassana, or insight meditation. That is trying to have a deeper insight, very, very simply, into the three characteristics of reality: unsatisfactoriness, impermanence, and impersonality. These are kind of universal characteristics of all phenomena. But they're here all the time, but most of us don't see them. Who wants to see unsatisfactoriness? Who wants to see suffering? Huh? But it exists, right? It exists. The world's not perfect. It's you can say it's unsatisfactoriness, it's suffering, it's imperfection of the human condition. Most of us, one of the main activities of human beings is to try to deny, avoid, or escape from suffering. It's called the pursuit of happiness, right? Yeah, that's why we're chasing happiness, but where we're chasing happiness because we have to get away from suffering. That's why. Yeah. Restlessness and confusion and doubt, and I mean, there's all Buddha mentioned 5 particular hindrances of the mind. But my experience over 48 years of meditation is there's more like 50,000 when you get down to the details. But there's 4 or 5 basic ones, so don't give up. These 5 basic ones are just they take various permutations, greed, aversion, sleepiness and dullness, restlessness, doubt. These are the 5 basic ones. But with insight meditation, one gains some understanding of how the mind works. Just for example, just reflecting upon, about suffering, for example. If we can, one of Ajahn Chah's teachings, which I mentioned gave more details a few talks ago, but one of his teachings was that suffering is our teacher. And I was just reflecting that if I had heard that teaching when I was, many years ago when I was younger, many decades ago when I was younger, I would have saved myself so much suffering. Because most people's main activity in life is try to avoid suffering. But now if you realize, suffering can be a very valuable teacher. Rather than spending all that time fighting with suffering, and you realize it's a teacher, you can turn it around, right? Try to study it, try to investigate. Why am I suffering? What's the cause of this? And then you can look at, what's the obstacle in the way of that? Because in a way, our true nature is well-being. If you want to, ultimately, it's well-being. But then these various hindrances get in the way and causes suffering. Mostly it's just not understanding correctly, that's what it is. But, if we don't try to learn from it or study it, we don't even know that it's not an absolute thing we have to keep running away from. When you understand what the cause of it is, you can relieve the cause and it can dissolve. There's a possibility there. That's what the Buddha realized. You can find the end of suffering. But this requires, I say, it's a bit more effort than just sitting there focusing on breathing. And you can just imagine trying to open to suffering, for example. Focusing on breathing, you can ignore suffering. Just forget about it. Just breathing, very peaceful breath coming in, going out. No problems. But then turn your attention to suffering, ouch. I don't want to see that. Back to the breath again. Bliss out. Hide away. And some people, especially those who are good at focused attention on the breathing, for example, if they're good at it, some of them escape. They escape into it. They lose themselves. It's like a bit of an intoxication. They can just sit down and they're away and no problems until they open their eyes again and they look at their iPhone. They got a great big list of emails to answer. But usually, these 2 kinds of meditation, the calm meditation and the insight meditation, they should work together. Very, very simply, Ajahn Chah said, the deeper the calm, the deeper the insight. And if your mind is quite calm, and then you can have you observe, you see more clearly impermanence or unsatisfactoriness, it goes very, very deep into your psyche then. Not just a thought in the back of your mind, things really are impermanent. We know that intellectually, don't we? Yeah, things are impermanent, yeah. We're getting a little bit older every minute, every second. But when you really see that from a very, very deeply calm mind, it really goes very, very deep inside your psyche. And you don't forget it. So I would say Ajahn Chah he was a meditation master. He mastered both kinds of meditation. He didn't talk, when I was with him, he didn't talk too much about the calm meditation because it was sort of assumed. The regime in the monastery was set up to support, a very simple way of life, very few distractions, and everyday practicing regularly, and we had a lot of time for our own practice. And so we just assumed that one could develop some degree of calmness of mind. So when I was with him, a lot of his teachings were about insight meditation, where he's giving us certain themes to reflect upon or contemplate. So like I mentioned, the first one of the ones I mentioned was, suffering is our teacher. And in the early days when he was a teacher, he'd really push the monks. They have a word in Thai called Totem, which roughly translates as torture, but it's not very politically correct, so we won't. But he really pushed the monks. I just say that, contemplating unsatisfactoriness is being able to step outside your comfort zone. When you're outside your comfort zone, you start to hear yourself screaming, I don't like that. I don't want that. This isn't good for me. Comes across a whole bunch of your excuses yourself makes up. But basically, you're just suffering. But many of us are very logical, so we say, well, it's not that I'm suffering, it's just that this isn't good for my health, that's all. But when I was with him, he didn't torture the monks so much. I mean, just the way of life for some people was torture already. One of the Westerners came to Ajahn Chah one time, and they said, this teaching's supposed to be to lead us out of suffering. But just coming and living here at the monastery, getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning, this is more suffering. He said, well, this is the suffering to end suffering. Pushing outside your comfort zone, getting up at 3 a.m. rather than 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, or even later, huh? 5 minutes before 9, where you go to work. And eating one meal a day. Most people, they just, whenever they feel hungry, they just go to the fridge and help themselves. But there we had one meal a day, and we couldn't choose what we wanted. It was just given out to us. And in the very early days, they just, when the monks came back from the alms round, they just put all the food together in the kitchen. They roughly separated it out a bit, all the fish together and all the meat together and all the vegetables together, and then they came down with this big pot and just ladled it into your bowl. You're only allowed to say, I don't want it. You can't say more, just say can't. So when it came to the chili paste at the end, no thanks. But for most of the Thai monks, that was the best part of the meal was the chili paste on top of everything. In the early days, well, I won't talk about that, that's a bit too much. The menu of the early days. Frogs and anyway, we survived somehow, But with that basis of calm created by the environment and the meditation exercises, then he gave more teachings about insight, themes to reflect upon, contemplate, rather than just focusing on being attentive to your breath. Bring up reflections about, impermanence, for example. So the first teaching he gave, I mentioned anyway, was suffering is our teacher. That was quite a transformative way of viewing suffering, something to learn from rather than trying to escape from. The second one was about impermanence. And again, we all know intellectually things are impermanent, they're always changing, but we don't really understand it. We just assume that things will keep going anyway. Yeah, this building will persist. But when you reflect upon impermanence, you can see now. You can begin to see how it is changing. You see the cracks in the wall. And when I was in Switzerland, we built a new meditation hall on the very top floor of this. We purchased this old hotel, and we converted some rooms upstairs into meditation hall on the top floor. It was quite a spectacular room, actually, because it had a big window facing out, and the view was of this 3,700-meter mountain out the window. And it was on the very top floor, so it was very, very quiet and peaceful. And as soon as we got it finished and painted it all up, and it's the building's 4 stories high, and it's a wooden building. You see, when we're building trying to put the floor in, we found that from one corner to the other, it was that much difference. The corner had sagged, the whole house had sagged down. So by the time we got it finished, plastered and painted, and I was sitting in this meditation room and admiring how beautiful it was, and then there's a crack already in the wall. The very day after it was plastered and painted, there's a crack in it already. Of course, my first reaction was, oh, no. But then, oh, right, impermanent. Yeah, there's a lesson in that. Yeah. Now this building is teaching us. And the building is also it's in what's called Avalanche Danger Zone 1, the most severe avalanche danger in the Swiss Alps. And at first I thought, well, big deal, there was an avalanche there about every 100 years or something or other. So the last one was 25 years ago, so I thought 75 more years to go, I'll be gone by then. But then when I was there, we had the 100-year snowfall. And we were evacuated 3 times because of avalanche danger. So this building could be just, there goes our $1,000,000 francs, just blasted away by snow. That kind of nice, fluffy, white, fluffy stuff, But when it starts rolling on a mountainside, it becomes very, very dangerous. And then when I was here a few years ago, I had a bushfire here, and my hut burned down. And we saw some pictures. It was on the news. There were pictures of the building burning, and somebody told us, it was one of the other buildings, the communal building. So I thought, well, it's unfortunate, but it's no big, it can be rebuilt again, Then when I look closely, I recognize it's my building. Oh, wait a minute. This is getting personal. Yeah, it's impermanent. Yes, I know, but ouch. It's my stuff which is there. So that's what I mean. The Buddha is talking about with reflecting and contemplating about these themes, intellectually. But when you contemplate them, you begin to recognize it. You see it. How many of us actually look for impermanence? Most of us look for permanence, don't we? We want to make sure that when I put my foot down, the floor is going to still be here. But maybe it doesn't. If you walk over there, you find there's a board that sags. You might fall through one day. Fortunately, it's over there in the corner where most people don't go. But and we don't tell people, but most of this building is sort of held together with paint. I don't know how old it is, but it's very old. But we got a very good paint job on it. Many layers of paint holding it together. But Ajahn Chah would give these reflections. Usually in the evening, after the meditation, when your mind is reasonably calm, he would give these particular themes to contemplate. And it was, it was a little bit harder for Westerners, I think. I found it harder anyway because I had to translate from Thai to English in my brain, you see. I still thought in English. And so I heard it in Thai and then I translate, oh, that means... But sometimes it was very valuable too because I had to really listen. Yeah. You don't realize that sometimes you listen to a talk, so to speak, but you're somewhere else. You're lost in your thoughts somewhere. But when Ajahn Chah was speaking in Thai, I had to really listen to understand what he's saying. So it sounded like a kind of empowering effect, even though I had to translate into English. But is that what that means? And sometimes, especially when it's in the Thai language, because Thai language is based on the Buddhist language. And some of these Buddhist concepts are very hard to bring across in English. Like the teaching of impersonality. The Buddha is saying that there's no permanent self. And for many Westerners, I mean, it's very, very complicated or difficult to understand that. What, me? I'm not permanent? Me? I'm so precious? I deserve to be put in concrete and have a statue made of me? And how much we depend upon, having there is some continuity of self, your memories, etc. Yeah. But even your memories are impermanent, right? Maybe some of you were too young to forget your memories, but wait a few years. And I think it's not just because of, mental deterioration. I think it's because I just have so much information, so many different people. What's that person's name again? I got a list now of hundreds of names I have to go through. It's like having a search engine in your brain, but there's so much information in it. It takes more than just a few seconds now. It's got a lot of information to go through. But there were some other teachings of Ajahn Chah which were also extremely relevant, even though they seemed to be quite mundane, but they were very, very important. One of them, which was, to me, was one of the most shocking ones for me, anyway, when I heard it. Some of us were walking with him somewhere, and I don't know, it was almost as if he could read my mind. Because he just turned to me and said, I can't give you any wisdom, All I can give you is patience. And I just was thunderstruck. What? But I came here. I came all the way around, halfway around the world, to a Buddhist country. I came to your monastery, where the great wise master was, to get your wisdom. He says, I can't give you any wisdom. So disappointed. He said, but I can give you patience. Well, that doesn't sound like a great exchange. Patience for wisdom. I mean, but it took me a little while to figure it out, what he was talking about, because there's different kinds of wisdom, of course. And at a certain point, when I was with him, about 5 months, I stayed with him in his monastery and talked to him almost every single day, or listened to his talks almost every single day. And I realized that, before the rains retreat, we would go to his hut and listen to him just talk to people and receive guests, and he wasn't giving any formal teachings, just meeting people and talking to them. And I could sit there all night listening to him talk, just totally wide awake. And then one day, after I think it was the beginning of the rains retreat, he said, okay, no more of this evening meeting at my place. Go to the meditation hall to sit. So that evening, or one evening, he just said, okay, no meeting tonight. Go back and meditate in your own room or something. Yeah. So I thought, disappointed, but okay. So it was about 6 o'clock in the evening. It's already dark in Thailand. So I got up from my seat and was walking back to my hut. And the further I got from Ajahn Chah, the more tired I felt. I got to my hut at 6:15 and just fell asleep. I realized I'm living off his energy. If I was sitting at his hut, I could sit there all night and not feel sleepy. But the further I got away from his hut, the more tired I got, So I'm living off his energy. This isn't very healthy. He's not going to be here forever. And that's what happened. Some people who didn't have that insight, when Ajahn Chah got sick and wasn't teaching anymore, they lost the path. They lost their faith in Buddhism and lost their faith in monastic life and disrobed. But I realized it was quite dangerous to depend upon his energy, his wisdom. So I realized I had to go off on my own and try to find my own wisdom. I'm still looking for it, by the way. So I write books instead. Cherry pick other people's wisdom and put it in the book. But the point is, what he was trying to say is that, the real wisdom comes from realizing it yourself. There's in the scriptures, there's three kinds of so-called wisdom. There's wisdom from your own thinking, which usually is a bit of a closed loop, you see. You think, you have certain ideas and certain information you get, and you just kind of think around circles. Then there's a wisdom you get from studying or learning. When you talk to other people, when you pick up a book, you get new information, and new knowledge. I wouldn't say maybe it's wisdom, but it's new knowledge you put into your own way of thinking, and maybe it expands your thinking. Oh, I never thought of that before. But of course, the ultimate kind of wisdom comes from meditation practice, which is direct realization of the way the mind is, direct realization of unsatisfactoriness, impermanence, impersonality. You can have your own thoughts about impermanence and impersonality, for example. You can get some information from other people about it. You can look in the dictionary, find out what the meaning of it is. But having your own direct realization of it is quite a different experience. The other kind of knowledge you get, or wisdom, usually you forget. I got so much information at university, and I forgot most of it. Never used it again. I studied engineering, so, well, maybe it helps me measure a straight line or something, but haven't built any bridges lately. But the direct realization, you never forget it. It's your personal experience then. So what he was saying is that he gives us the patience because he encourages us, he sets up the routine, he oversees the monastery, that it's a place of practice, and he encourages us to keep going. And as you keep meditating, you see it yourself. And the Buddhist teachings, as we do in the chanting every night, we say the Buddhist teaching is the Dhamma is to be realized each person for themselves. You can't rely upon a teacher. You can rely upon a teacher to guide you, give you the right direction, but you have to walk that path yourself. So he provided the patience for us, and then we ideally you have your own realization within that format of patience then. Your own realization is your own wisdom then. You see for yourself. That's the real wisdom. The things that he said, they can be very inspiring for a while, but then usually when you need them, you forget them anyway. So that was very, very helpful, even though it was a bit shocking to me. It was very, very helpful. What he's pointing at. Here I was writing down his teachings. And I was even recording some of his talks. I was trying to learn Thai also, but record his talks and then play them back again. And so I could understand the Thai language, what he was really saying. But the point was to follow his guidance, his instructions, and realize that for yourself. What is he talking about? What's the real meaning of that? And every once in a while, it would kind of dawn upon me. He would say, many times he'd say the same kind of theme over and over again. Everything is impermanent, everything is changing, everything is impermanent. I heard that before. I want some new wisdom, something interesting. And maybe one day you're listening to it from a different state of mind, a calm state of mind, and oh, yes, everything is constantly changing. I can't rely upon anything. Here I was, I already planned tomorrow and the next day, and you can't rely upon it. There may be some continuity, yes, but you can't rely upon it. So don't overstretch yourself. And of course, the example he gave about impermanence, was about the glass. He picked up a glass one time and he said, "Look at this glass." He said, "It's already broken," he said. I said, "What? It's not broken yet." He said, it's already broken. This glass, as soon as it's made, it's impermanent. It's going to break one day. So if you really understand impermanence, you see it already broken. When it finally does break, you say, "Oh, finally." You finally realized your true nature. You finally expressed your true nature of impermanence, glass. Do we do that? We do when it breaks. "Oh, no, that's very unfortunate. Oh, where's the super glue? I want to preserve that permanence." But it's quite different, isn't it? Different attitude. When the glass breaks, when your car breaks down, you say, "Oh, wonderful." You realize the ultimate truth of life. That thing is broken. It's broken the moment you got it, actually. But we never saw that. So imagine how that would change your life, huh? Just understanding that deeply. Things are impermanent. Would you worry about the future? This much time worrying about tomorrow, the next day? Might happen, but not reliable. Maybe. You think, "No, it's got to happen. You say, "Maybe." Another one of his teachings, Ajahn Chah's teaching, which was also very relevant, especially for the development of more awareness. He talk often about time and place. Time and place, the right time, the right place. Situational. Because most of us, we kind of run our lives in concepts. Ideals, concepts should be like this. And we have a certain principle. Yes, your mind should be calm, for example. Yeah, I'm here to develop meditation, to have a calm mind. But today your mind's going crazy. Time and place is not the right time for it. The place you're in, look at like the principles of the monastic life. The main principle of the monastery was, eat little, sleep little, speak little, meditate a lot. But those situations are very different. Eat little, what does that mean? When the weather's colder, we have to eat more. When you've been working hard, you need to sleep more. Got to look at the time and the place. You have your principle, but then you got to apply it. So you have to be very, very aware of the situation, the time and the place, how to apply this principle now, rather than to stick to some kind of a high ideal or some principle, and it's not suitable to the occasion. It doesn't quite fit in there. In a way, Ajahn Chah was a living example of that, because even though he grew up in northeast Thailand, he was not very well educated. And northeast Thailand is the poorest and the kind of simplest part of Thailand. And then he went there, then he got on a plane, flew to London. Never been out of the country before, very rarely even been to Bangkok. And then he ended up in London. different climate, different food, different culture, in a non-Buddhist country, and he didn't faze him in the least. He just looked around at people, studying things. It's like a little child in a candy shop, I think, most of the time. When he came to Vancouver, where I come from, he came there one time for a couple of days, and we took him out for a walk along the waterfront, and around the bay in Vancouver. They have a boardwalk, and there are all these people jogging. And it must have been the first time he ever saw anybody jogging. People in northeast Thailand don't go out for a jog in the morning. They go out to the rice field or take their water buffalo out to feed, They have no energy or time for jogging. So he saw all these joggers going by early in the morning, and he kind of looked at them, and then he said, "They're chasing their youth, aren't they?" And I stopped and looked, and it was all middle-aged men and women chasing their youth. Then we're in this apartment, and it's on the 12th floor in the west end of Vancouver. And he looked over the balcony and said, "Do these things ever fall down?" Probably was never in a 12th floor apartment in his life. 12 floors off the ground, But I was really impressed by in Vancouver they have the Indians, the native Indians built these, they call totem poles. They're huge big logs from a cedar tree, and they carved them with all the animals, you see. So they had a few of these in the park. So he was really, really impressed by them. He says he saw them because they're the animals, you see. So they're totems. So there's a bear and a salmon and a raven and things, and you say, "Oh my goodness, these people really respect nature, don't they?" Yeah, they raise the nature up as a totem, you see, to pay respects to it. Of course, they had to survive by eating the fish, and yeah. But many of these teachings, of course, the point was to put them into practice in our life. They are little kind of signposts or reflections or contemplations, and to really make them wisdom, your own wisdom, you need to apply them in our life situation. And some of them are very, very simple, but if you contemplate them and can integrate them into your life, imagine if you can just recognize suffering has a cause. It's teaching you something. Why are you suffering? You don't need to go into your head and try to figure it out. Just try to open to that suffering. Things are unpleasant. Is it physical? Is it mental? Is it emotional? And there's some cause for it. There's some root cause there. Once you remove the cause, suffering passes away. But just trying to ignore it, trying to escape from it, will never find a solution, a resolution. You can temporarily kind of forget about it, but it comes back somewhere else. If you can really look at it straight, just try and see it as it happens, physical pain, mental anguish, regrets, worries, fears, whatever, just so you can open to them. And of course, it's easier to say than do, but with the support of some degree of calmness of mind, you can look at your fears, for example. Most people look at fear and then they get frightened about the fear. But if your mind is calm, you can just look at the fear. You can observe it from a calm, clear place. Interesting to observe fear. It's a physical reaction there. There's a certain mental reaction. What is it exactly? As somebody said, nothing to be afraid of except fear itself. Fear is just an ordinary human reaction. All sentient beings have fear. Or you can just look at it and observe it. You don't get into the fear so much. Become the knower of that. And that's what the word Buddha means. The Buddha means the one who knows. He knows all these different aspects of the human condition. See, they're just conditions. They arise and pass away, arise and pass away. They're not permanent. The worst fears, greatest joys, unfortunately, rise and pass away. But unless you look at it and investigate it, you just don't see it. See it as it really is. So rather than, sometimes people say, oh, Buddha's teaching about nirvana or some abstract thing, but most of the time the Buddha just mentions seeing things as they really are. As they really are. We see things, but we don't really see the real deep truth of them. We see some kind of perceptual distortion, basically, based upon our lack of understanding and lack of clear seeing. But the clearer your mind is, the more calm, the more mindfulness and clarity you have. Slowly begin to see as it really is. The cloud begins to kind of fade away. The fog lifts. And it's a different way of seeing things, much more peaceful. Then you're in harmony with the way things really are when you can see it. So easy to say, but some homework to do, most of us. But it's at least it's some relief to recognize that it is possible. That's why we have this image of the Buddha. He's the one who apparently has done that. He's seen the way things really are, and he can sit there very peacefully with a little smile on his face and say, okay, I'm waiting for you guys to catch up. So Ajahn Chah was a very significant figure, and there's a book up there on the very top shelf, a bit thick actually, but his life story, but life and teachings, but at least having some reflections about, sometime reflecting on a source of wisdom could give you a new perspective on life, and hopefully if you can put it into your own life, then you'll see for yourself, to be realized each person for themselves. So hopefully you'll be able to continue with the practice and see the results for yourself. It's up to each one of us. So good luck.